Hi, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Thursday discussion that we have been having. It is turning into a weekly thing about applying AI in teaching and learning. It's so great to see you back, and we're going to dive into a topic that may be unfamiliar, at least in practice for some of you: universal design for learning, something that you've heard about but maybe not applied in your own work before. So, we're over the next three sessions going to take a look at that very closely, and particularly how to get hands on with that through the assistance of AI. Let me just share a couple of things with you in case I have not had an opportunity to meet you before. By the way, there's our title of today's session: UDL 3.0 meets AI, breaking barriers or building new ones. Intentionally a little controversial. But there's me. My name's Jim Wagstaff. And the way I'm coming to this topic, if you've never been in one of my workshops or if we've not met before, I come at this from multiple angles. So I actually do a lot of professional development work, particularly for educators, through two vehicles. One is at the SMU Academy, which I teach on the application of ed tech, not just AI, but ed tech in innovative ways. And then through the Principals Academy here in Singapore, which is where I live. Then I'm also a faculty member at the AI Institute that the American Academy of Colleges and Universities is running in this academic year. So that helps me. I guess I engage more as a consultant there, more than anything a mentor to different schools. And so it gives me an interesting insight into what other schools are doing and uh, in different parts of the world. And we're all kind of on this journey together, would be the summation of what I've seen so far in the AI Institute. In fact, I should mention, in the next couple of weeks, we just had a mid-institute event, and amazing insights came out of that, just in terms of what people are struggling with and where they're seeing success. And I'm going to be doing a summary of that in one of our Thursday sessions coming up. So hopefully you'll come back for that. And then the third angle that I take on this topic is I'm, as you probably know, the co founder of an AI teaching and learning platform called Noodle Factory. So I'm coming at this from different angles, and we'll go through that and unpack that a bit more in terms of what that means for you and how you can benefit from those multiple perspectives. By the way, there's my contact information, and I'll flash that up in a different way. And I'm going to move myself out of the way because I got an earful on last week's session. I think I was hiding the QR code at one point. So let me take my face completely out of it. But there's our QR code for our educator network. If you're not a member of that yet, it's a group of like-minded educators from every level, from primary school through to workplace learning. Would encourage you to join that. We have good, lively conversations. I try to post in there as much as I can. And these are people who are on a similar journey, and we're trying to help each other understand the best, most effective, safest methods of applying AI in teaching and learning. Okay, so back to our topic for today: universal design for learning. Uh, Let me make a confession as I give you the definition of universal design for learning. There was a time that I thought UDL was really just for special needs students, special needs learners. And when I had the opportunity to do my postgraduate study in academic practice, one of the areas that I really dug into was UDL. Got very interested in it. In fact, it's kind of consumed, more recently, consumed my thinking for the best part of a year in terms of how we can apply this more effectively using AI. But I digress. The part that was an aha moment, a light bulb moment for me, was that UDL at its core is really meant to be a framework that promotes accessible learning opportunities. And the key phrase is for all learners. And this very much has its roots in the origins of universal design for learning. And forgive me while I give you a very brief history lesson, because it's informative as to what and how universal design for learning can do for us and for our learners. So go all the way back to the 1960s. There was this notion that spaces and buildings in architecture should be designed to be more accessible. And in fact, one of the very first influential examples of this was in 1963, I believe was the year from memory, in Norwich, England. Selwyn Goldsmith advocated for what he called dropped curbs. We now call those curb cuts or mini ramps in curbs. And there's a photo of one right there you can see. The reason that this is so illuminating is because the original vision for this was, well, for wheelchairs, for those who are wheelchair bound, to make it easier for them to traverse a city where there might have been a lot of barriers in the form of curbs next to pavement. So, what Selwyn Goldsmith did was pretty eye opening. It's one of those things that you think about today that's very simple, and yet it has such a big impact. And here's why. And I'm going to change photos. I actually took this photo yesterday, was at a traffic light, and I just noticed this, and I thought, oh, isn't this a coincidence? Here's someone you can see who you can only see one child, but there's actually another child in that pram, that stroller. It's raining. One of the kids, a balloon of theirs blew away. It was pretty chaotic. And I thought, isn't it great that we've got that curb cut or that mini ramp so she doesn't have to navigate the curb with all else that's going on? So, said all that to say, that's a great example of universal design, which is an architectural principle that says when you put something in like a curb cut that's meant to benefit or make something more accessible for someone who has a need, as being wheelchair bound might be, can that be beneficial to all users of that space? And this is a great example because if you're pushing something on wheels, if you've got a bike, maybe you're a senior and you don't walk so well anymore, or if, like me, you've got a couple of small dogs who sometimes have trouble mounting curbs, it's really useful. Now, fast forward to the 1970s, an architect named Ronald Mace, who interestingly was wheelchair bound, coined the term universal design. And it was his vision, and he was sort of a driver of the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, to make spaces accessible to all and to not retrofit spaces for accessibility, but to design it in up front, right? To make that just a principle of design that was used up front. Now you might be thinking, hold on, what does all of this have to do with universal design for learning? Well, it very much influenced the thinking around the early work on UDL. So Ann Meyer and others from CAST back in the late 1990s started to work on and think about, well, what could a framework in learning look like that thought about accessibility needs, but also thought through the impact and the positive influence on all learners. And you started to see a task force form up, the early iterations of UDL formed up, and fast forward to middle of last year, the third major iteration of UDL came out. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, we'll talk about the pillars of UDL, and this is not a UDL course, as I may have mentioned. There are plenty of great deep dive courses where you can get very hands-on with UDL as a framework. Today, we're going to just introduce it and then show you some examples. I would encourage you to get hands-on with it, but maybe that will come over the next two sessions where we really start to unpack and dive into some very specific examples of how UDL can be applied and sped up. The application can be sped up using AI assistance. So why UDL? Well, the notion of one size fits all learning just really it doesn't work. Variability in learners is the norm. It's not the exception. It is the norm. So even in small ways, we all have variability in our needs, our preferences, what makes us successful in our chosen learning directions and outcomes. And so we need to embrace that variability. UDL also promotes equity, giving all students an equal opportunity to succeed. And it's very practice based. So UDL 3.0 in particular brings together the experiences of educators from all levels and incorporates that experience and those practices in the framework. And here's what the framework looks like. At the top level, the core principles of UDL are this. Multiple means of engagement, meaning we give learners choices, in particular to spark interest and sustain their interest throughout the learning journey. Multiple means of representation. And at its simplest form, we would recognize this as, let's say, if something is very text heavy, what if we could offer visuals or even video or audio, things that allow the content, if you will, to be represented in multiple ways that align more towards what the learner needs to make them successful. And then there are multiple means of expression. So, how much choice do we offer learners in terms of how they demonstrate understanding and the application of that understanding? So, the framework itself, and we'll share this with you if you've never checked it out. CAST is the organization; it's a nonprofit organization that's behind UDL 3.0. And if you run your eyes down through each of these core principles, then you have the various representations of that. And underneath this, there are 31 checkpoints. So it can be very overwhelming and seem a little complicated if you've never encountered UDL. Um, as I mentioned, not a UDL course, but I'll encourage you to check that out. And if you wanted to get some training on UDL specifically, there's some great options on the CAST website that we'll share with you. So let's just unpack this very quickly in terms of these principles, because we're going to look at today some examples of, with AI, how these principles can be enacted and some of the checkpoints in the UDL framework. So first is multiple means of engagement. This is about choice. You'll hear me say that word probably several more times today. This is about choice, and it's about learner choice. One of the ways that I come to this topic is thinking about differentiated instruction as a complement to UDL. Differentiated instruction, obviously, is something that if you're in the Singapore schools, you are very familiar with and you're probably using every single day. Sometimes I have heard people express that those two thoughts, differentiated instruction and UDL, are in conflict. In fact, they're very complementary. A little under a year ago, I was at a conference where I actually heard Carol Ann Tomlinson speak, she was really created the foundation through her work and her research for differentiated instruction. And about 10 minutes into her keynote presentation, she said, I really see differentiated instruction and universal design for learning as being very, very complementary. And I thought, there it is. They do overlap. Differentiated instruction tends to be very much about the choices that educators make about what's going to happen in the classroom, groupings, and there can be some learner choice, leveling, projects, and it's primarily the educator that is making those choices up front, even if we're doing it at the design level. Whereas universal design for learning is very much about the learner making the choice and even evolving those choices over time to experiment and explore the learning process and how best they learn. So anyway, multiple means of engagement, that can be the choice, the relevance, the authenticity from the learner perspective, being able to collaborate, engage with peers, get feedback and do reflection. So it is about that spark of interest and sustained interest that engagement is meant to influence. And then, of course, Then, of course, we've got multiple means of representation. And this is, we might have visual aids, audio resources, interactive content that could extend, if you have the resource, things like augmented reality. We'll look at AI assisted options. There's so many different things here that when you brainstorm, particularly with an AI, you can see that the list is very long in terms of what we can do in terms of representing content, information, opportunities to learn. However, one of the barriers being time, AI can help us to repurpose much of what we're doing today and re-represent that. And then finally, we've got multiple means of action and expression. So we all know written assignments. And if you were on our session last week, you know we probably over rotate and over rely on writing a bit too much these days. Why? because in assignments and assessments, those are easy to copy and paste from generative AI, even when we build in some AI resistance into our assignments or assessments. Uh, sorry, a brief aside. Right before we got on this session, I got an email that was advertising, as it was a webinar about AI proof assignments. And I thought, I'm going to attend that webinar because I made a statement last week in our Thursday session. I said, there's no such thing as AI proof anymore. I would love to be proved wrong on that. So I'm going to attend that webinar. I tend to use the term AI resistant. And if you look at these other means of expression, whether they're presentations, debates, group discussions, creative projects, physical demonstrations like role plays, experiments, or hands on activities, these tend to be a bit more AI resistant, at least today. Okay, so today's part, first of three, is really meant to open up this topic for you. That's about as deep as we're going to go on UDL. I've got a couple of other UDL components that we'll look at, but I would encourage you to, on your own, get some training or get reacquainted with UDL if it's something that you're unfamiliar with, or if maybe it's been a while since you've thought about applying UDL in your own practice. So we're going to look at some examples of this, and you might want to have your favorite general generative AI tool open, maybe ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, whatever you choose to use on a particular day. And we're going to look at how these learning opportunities for everyone through UDL in small ways, we can start to do some things immediately. Now, if you're teaching in primary school, a lot of this is going to be in the physical space, the classroom. If you're in secondary school, some of this could involve more AI that is directly accessed by students or used or harnessed by students in assignments or formative assessments. It could be assistive technologies. So there is quite a bit that we can do in with younger students, but the AI component tends to emerge a bit more with older students, and certainly in higher education, things like accessible course materials, being a little more flexible on assessment or assignment options, that the different pathways that we can give students to demonstrate that they have understood and can apply the learning. Um, and then even things as simple as captioning or transcription or visual aids, something like I'll do right now. I'll turn on captioning here. I happen to have Spanish turned on. I was speaking to a group that spoke Spanish a few weeks ago, and that's what my setting is on. But even something as simple as that is an example of, if we plan it and we design it in, of the components or a checkpoint that we can embrace around universal design for learning. In the workplace, where we're dealing with a high degree of variability based on role and experience and age and generation, things like AI enhanced learning, we'll take a look at this in a moment, or multimodal presentations, more collaborative learning, potentially that's moderated by AI, and then being adaptive in our assessments. If we're doing knowledge checks, if we're doing maybe up to and including certifications, accommodating different learning styles and approaches to action and expression. All of this, as you can imagine, and I've alluded to, can be perceived as, and in many cases it is real, to be a set of challenges that prevent us from fully embracing UDL. Most notably, time, resources, our own training or lack thereof, and organizationally, a resistance to change. Now, AI can certainly help us with the first two, maybe with the third, and resistance to change is very much a human thing, but because this is often political, or it may be just human nature getting in the way, some of that needs to be viewed as a change management opportunity. Let's look at some of the time-saving AI tools for educators. If you're at all interested in, maybe just in very small ways, applying some universal design for learning in the work that you do around lesson planning or course design, and then the implementation of that, and even the student engagement, let's look at a couple of things that we can benefit from around lesson planning, around data analysis, around communication. So if you're following along with me and you have an AI tool open, I'm just going to try a few things out in ChatGPT. I was doing this a little bit earlier, and I thought, what can ChatGPT do to help me? Let's imagine I've got a digital marketing course. It's for year 2 students in a polytechnic here in Singapore, and these learners are going to have a career in marketing, but I want them to have a UDL experience. I want to design this into the course. So ChatGPT actually does a pretty good job as a brainstorming partner, if you will, giving me suggestions around, and you'll notice it aligned to the 4 core principles of UDL. It's giving me some great suggestions on what I can do. If you remember, and we'll just kind of have a quick look at that. If you remember from last week, we looked at how brisk teaching can help us to create these AI resistant assignments and assessments. But in this case, we're going to, now I'm using the free version of brisk teaching. There's a built in UDL component to this, but I'm just going to prompt brisk to do the same thing with what's up on the screen here. This is a more detailed version of a course outline for that same marketing course. Now, this is pretty good. Brisk is giving me some ideas now that I would in fact, I can see a lot of things I need to edit and get into shape. But you'll notice every one of these sections of the course outline, the lesson plan, has a UDL suggestion to it. So that's pretty interesting. That's pretty useful. Yeah. So if I run my eyes across that, that just using those tools, and Brisk is more of a specialized tool, but in this case, it's using a general AI model, a large language model. There are some tools, though, and I want to introduce you to one of them that is purpose built for universal design for learning. The one that we'll look at right now is called Ludia, and we'll put a link to it. And it's a free tool that was developed by a couple of educators who teach in international schools. And what Ludia does is very similar to what you saw with ChatGPT or Brisk teaching, but it's specifically for UDL on things like engagement strategies, representation techniques, expression and communication methods. So you can think of Ludia as a brainstorming tool. So if I jump back in, and if I go over to Ludia, which is hosted on Poe, I forgot what Poe stands for. Maybe somebody put that into the chat. I think it's the platform for open experimentation. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put the same prompt in that I gave ChatGPT, but I'm going to add something here. I want Ludia to link recommendations to the UDL checkpoints. And I just want to see what the difference is here. So this looks pretty interesting. So it's really focusing on more specific areas of learning and skill, and it's linking me back to the UDL framework. What I like too is you saw there's some follow-on prompts. So there are additional questions or prompts that I can click through to get more ideas and more information. So this is one of those things where you kind of have to go and choose what works best for you. But if I take that checkpoint 7.2 and I go back over to the UDL framework, you can see there I can click through and see a little bit more about that. There's some other areas of interests and identities, more considerations. Yeah, so a lot of different places that I could go with that. So if you find that time is a big factor for you and you don't have enough time, then potentially AI as a catalyst for UDL to automate some of those tasks like lesson planning if you're using Brisk teaching, or maybe even just Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, personalization. Thinking about, I didn't really cover it in what I just did, but language, maybe diversifying the languages that are available to students in the materials that I provide. Real-time support, maybe having an agent that students can engage. There are a lot of different AI-powered tools that we can look at, whether those are adaptive learning platforms, intelligent tutoring systems, using automated content creation. All of these are great time savers, full stop. But in the context and in the service of universal design for learning, all of these types of tools can be harnessed as well. So I want to show you an example, and I'm going to go in reverse order this time because I had a couple of people from our last session say, hey, you talked a lot about secondary school examples and higher education examples. How about workplace learning? So I'm going to today start with workplace learning just as a quick inspiration or example for you. So imagine if we could give students more choice and design in choice for learners around things like knowledge checks or the formatting of content, AI powered assessments. And I'm going to show you an example here of a course. This is an author that I know and have worked with, and Up to Speed is a company that I'm associated with, and they actually own this curriculum called Mastering Technical Sales. And I'll just kick this off. So if I were to go in and I'm exploring Mastering Technical Sales, so this particular agent knows everything about business value discovery, which is one of the workshops in Mastering Technical Sales. And I might click on a button that brings up a video and I get a different representation of the content.
Hi,
and here we've got John Kerr who's popping up, and he's going to tell us a little bit about
this video,
business value discovery, or in this case, Monday morning behavior, which is a concept in Mastering Technical Sales. But then I've also got the ability to engage with the agent, maybe do some knowledge checks. There's some role plays that are built into this. So certainly not replacing in this case, the facilitator of the workshop or the engagement with my peers, but think about the choice that this opens up for me as a learner and how this kind of ticks some of those boxes on the checkpoints for universal design for learning. In primary and secondary education, imagine I've got a range of learning styles and abilities in the classroom. And my UDL strategy, if I want to introduce those multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression, one way that could make that a bit more scalable for me is potentially to give my students the opportunity to engage in a role play. And here's an example of a role play that I've saved. This happens to be in biology. And here's a student named Abigail. I'm giving her choices. You notice there were choices around flashcards. I can do a knowledge check. In this case, I'm engaging with a virtual version of my teacher named Mr. Lee on the concept of photosynthesis. And so this gives me a way to go in and engage at my own pace. I could potentially do this at home, with younger students. Parents can help with this. They can certainly be involved. But it gives me a way through engagement and representation, as well as action and expression, to diversify the way that I learn. Now, depending on the age of the learner, I might not be fully aware of that, but that choice that I'm giving the learner is hopefully sparking that interest and sustaining that interest in this subject of photosynthesis. Now, how about a different example? So this is an example from health education. And this is a real example. So I presented something like this at a medical education conference late last year. And you can imagine preclinical medical students or nursing students who don't get a lot of interaction with humans. In the case of a year one or year two student, they're probably dealing with actors. That's very time consuming. It's expensive. You don't get a lot of chance to make that happen. But an AI assistant, or maybe a telehealth simulation with an AI assistant, well, that could be an option. So if we have this exercise already set up, and we've set up our role play, in this case, it's a patient role play around a patient that's presenting with symptoms of sepsis. I've set up a role play here. We've saved that. We've got a rubric in place where we're going to be giving the student feedback on things like history taking and diagnosis. It's a part of a module. And this is a different means of representing what's in the module. And in this case, we're not going to score what's effectively a formative assessment. We're just going to give the medical student, in this case, it's a year one medical student, the ability to role play with a patient called John Doe. Very creative name. And so, I'm not going to make you go through this whole role play, but this is kind of a game changer for medical students who crave this sort of practice. So, the ability to, in this telehealth simulation, you know, use the keyboard or use my voice to engage with this virtual version of a patient, to go through the whole process of engaging with the patient, diagnosing what's going on, applying treatments, and then at the end, getting feedback on not just how well did I do in my diagnosis, but did you treat the patient like a human? Were you empathetic? These are the sorts of things that the AI can pick up on. So, one last example, and I'm going to draw from something that I covered last week, but I'm going to assume that the assignment or the assessment that I teed up for everyone last week in our session on Thursday, there's some improvement that would need to be made for UDL. So, I'm specifically going to focus in on AI for action and expression here. So, diverse assessment options, the ability to generate feedback, and the ability to engage in the learning in ways that are accessible for me. So, you remember this assignment, or if you weren't with us, this was an AI resistant or balanced assessment and assignment where I was asking students to interview historical figures who are no longer with us, but through their writings, we can have a virtual representation of them via AI. And the students were to go in and interview these historical figures and then basically do a mini documentary of their findings. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now overlay universal design for learning against that assignment. I'm going to do it in a couple of different ways, and you can see the feedback that I get. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take basically what's a screenshot of that assignment that I showed you earlier, and that's called LKY lesson. And I'm just going to let ChatGPT look at that and give me recommendations based on UDL 3.0 on how that can be improved. Look how quickly it's finding all sorts of gaps in my thinking related to UDL. So there's my suggested adjustments, and I can go back to the framework and I can click through and maybe brainstorm a bit more. I'm going to do the same thing just with Gemini so you can see the difference in the way Gemini responds. So, how can I redesign same questions and the same framework, same assignment? Now, Gemini is a little more concise. I kind of like the outline of this. This is very concise, and it's pointing to three specific checkpoints that I might want to go back to in UDL 3.0. But let's go back to Ludia. Remember, this is our purpose-built tool that is specifically for UDL. Same question, same assignment. Let's see what Ludia says. Okay, now, so you start to see some themes form up. But I think between these three, and this kind of speaks to a broader, maybe dilemma, but opportunity, because I've gone through three platforms, I'm actually getting slightly different things from each one. Now, again, the thing I like about Ludia as an assistant for UDL is it prompts me to continue the journey on exploration based on, in this case, how I can improve a particular assignment or assessment. And I can go down and drill down as deeply as I would like to on this. So I hope that this part one, which is a very quick flyby of UDL and some examples, has given you some inspiration. And if you've been following along and tried some things, I'd love to hear about that. Please let me know what those things are, or you could share them in the chat. In our next sessions, the next two sessions, we're actually going to do some walkthroughs, and we're going to encourage you in some free tools. So you won't have to pay for any subscriptions, but free tools. We're going to get you to explore some things and ensure that this proactive design for all learners we get a sense of that in a very hands-on way as to how we can, versus a reactive approach with differentiated instruction, not a bad approach, but a reactive approach or a teacher-driven uh, set of choices, how can we move towards more of a proactive and universal design framework? And that will be in our next session. Um, in terms of just a final thought, even in this coming week, um, as you start to think about the variability that exists in your group of learners, no matter what level or age or ability they might be at, think about variabilities. Notice the variability in your learners and think about how more choices, more flexibility, more modes of learning, more modes of representation, action, expression, and more personalization. How might your learners benefit from that? And then think about where and how potentially UDL might be a way to approach that. And then how can AI help you to speed that process along? So, with that, that brings us to the end of our session today. There is, and I will make sure to move my head out of the way so you can see that QR code. If you can go ahead and scan that QR code, we'd love to have you join the AI Educator Network. There is my contact information. Would love to stay in touch with you on this subject or any subject that might be on your mind related to the application of technology, specifically AI in teaching and learning. But we look forward to seeing you in our next session. And I'm just reminded that next week is the Lunar New Year. So we're celebrating Chinese New Year in Singapore and many parts of the world. So we're not going to be having a Thursday session next week, but we'll pick it up in the following week, which would be, I think it's the first week in February. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. But thank you so much for your time and your attention. This is such I think, a high impact topic. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to unpack, but hopefully you feel the same way and you're starting to get a sense of how you can apply these things in your own practice in meaningful ways that don't require that much more time or effort, thanks to generative AI. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, if you found it useful, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the content that we publish on a weekly basis. Also, head over to our website at noodlefactory.ai. There's tons of free resources there that focus on teaching and learning with AI. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to stay involved, join our community of practice and play, which is in our Facebook group, where we talk about really practical and useful approaches to using AI in teaching and learning. Until next time, happy noodling.